Welcome to another episode of Huobi Podcast. What is Huobi Podcast? Huobi Podcast will keep you updated on the news and events in the cryptocurrency industry. We'll also invite some key influencers to provide their take on the industry, share their insights and their stories on how they became a success, changing the world through blockchain technology. Next up is Reserve or Reserve Protocol. Their token is listed on Huobi, RSR. And we're going to interview and have a chat with the co-founder. Stay tuned to listen to it. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Huobi Nation. We have a special honor guest for today. It is Reserve Protocol.
So this is Nevin Freeman, the co-founder of Reserve.
Great, glad to have you on the podcast. Really appreciate you taking the time out. But can you just give a broad strokes of like who you are, first of all? Like, what do you do at Reserve?
So I'm the CEO, and so I oversee our strategy, hiring and coordination of the project generally. And I have a background in various different forms of entrepreneurship. Before getting into crypto, I originally dabbled in Bitcoin in 2011, but I didn't really get into the industry at the time. I sort of concluded that Bitcoin wouldn't work as money because of the volatility. And then, to make a very long story short, saw the momentum building in crypto, ended up coming back in with the idea of trying to turn crypto into functional money. And that is essentially what we are aiming to do.
Awesome. So can you give I know RSR is listed on Huobi. Can you just tell me of what RSR is and why it's important to the ecosystem of the cryptocurrency world?
Totally. So our project has two tokens, the Reserve token and the Reserve Rights token. And the Reserve Rights token is the one that is listed on Huobi now. And so the Reserve token is a stable coin, and the Reserve Rights token is a governance token. It's the second token in the protocol, and it's used in the process of stabilization in some instances. And it will hold some governance rights in the future, hence the name Reserve Rights. So those are kind of the basic functions of the token. And then smart contracts today, which are sort of the initial version of the Reserve Protocol, there's a full version that is yet to come, also hold other tokens that we call collateral tokens. And so the very simple way to think of the Reserve token right now is it's just a basket of other stablecoins aggregated together. And then there's a single token that can be issued by locking up those stablecoins in the basket, or you can redeem the Reserve token to get the stablecoins out of the basket. Right now, the three that are in the basket are USDC, TrueUSD, and Paxos. And the basic reason for that, you might ask, well, what's the point of that, right? Those stablecoins are already quite functional in and of themselves. A big reason why we're doing this is that any given fiat-backed stablecoin in the long course of history could be temporary. It could be that regulation or business models or whatever end up causing that stablecoin to shut down or change in its functionality over the course of time. And we want there to be a stablecoin that is as functional as something like TrueUSD or USDC in terms of stability, but also can last throughout the course of history. So the idea is that if any one of those tokens in the basket has any sort of problem, it can be removed from the basket and replaced with other stable coins of equivalent value. And so the vision is to have something that is, you can sort of look at the code and analyze the game theory and trust that it's going to sort of be there forever in the way that you can trust with Bitcoin, but it has stability in terms of purchasing power. That's sort of the basic premise of the Reserve.
It's been about a year or so that you've been listed. I think we listed your token on the 22nd or so on Huobi. I think that's right.
That is right. Yep.
Yeah, man.
Bitcoin Pizza Day.
Yeah, that's a very minimal. That's an amazing day. Like, it's next week. I'm excited for that.
Yep.
Congratulations. I think you guys have done really well on Huobi Global, and I think that you guys have a strong community. I see you guys on social media a lot. Like, how do you unite it? Because that's the most important thing I see is community. How do you build it in your eyes?
That's a really good question. I promise I wasn't asked to say this in advance. I am truly quite thankful to Huobi for listing the Reserve Rights token and doing it in such a way that helped draw attention and helped kickstart our community, because we do have this really interesting, thriving set of people on the internet who love talking about Reserve and learning more about it and telling people about it. And honestly, it's very organic. We do spend like some time making sure that we're in touch with the community, making sure that the the sort of people that are working full time on reserve are in some communication. So we have one of our team members on each weekday will drop into our public chats and spend just like at least half an hour having some conversation, and that kind of keeps an open communication channel. But really, a bunch of the community building that has happened is just from people who've shown up and been interested in what we're doing, and then taken it upon themselves to do whatever initiatives to kind of get the word out there more. And so, compared to some projects, I would say we're comparatively much lower investment on that, and sort of have let it grow organically. And I'm really happy with how that's turned out. There's some quite interesting folks in the RSR community, and I really regularly get Telegram messages from people just with like interesting ideas. Sometimes the ideas are really out there. A lot of times they're ideas that are super down to earth, sometimes things we've already thought of. But the community has started off being more in Europe, and over the course of time, we're now starting to build more community of RSR holders in Latin America, because our focus for the reserve stablecoin right now is Latin America. And so that's kind of the broad trajectory our community has taken.
Latin America is like a huge area of what people are trying to concentrate on with different the currencies going on in that area. Speaking of like, what's the push for adoption? Because like everyone talks about crypto being like a great problem solver, but at the end of the day, like we want to see it solve problems. We want to see real world adoption. Can you share with us like what's the roadmap for RSR like in the expanding countries?
Yeah, totally. So let me start by talking a little bit about the kinds of needs that we have come to understand that we're trying to address. If you are a person in Singapore, like you are right now, or in the US, like I am right now, a lot of the problems that crypto as money, like crypto as a form of money, can solve might be invisible to you, because they tend to occur in countries and in moments of history in those countries where problems are happening. There's sort of disorganization in government, and as a result of that, the regulatory situation in that country with respect to currency ends up just preventing a bunch of normal financial activities, both in terms of sometimes a country will impose capital controls on its own citizens and make it so you can only buy X amount of foreign currency. Like in Argentina, you can only buy, I think it's like $200 a week right now, and there's various other controls in place. But then another macro phenomenon is if a jurisdiction is having certain kinds of problems, then other countries on the outside can impose financial problems on its citizens by essentially labeling that place a high-risk country. And so like in Venezuela, for instance, as a Venezuelan, it's getting harder and harder to get access to global financial services because lots of compliance departments from banks and fintechs simply don't want to deal with the negative associations, even though it's totally legal to serve the vast majority of people in Venezuela with normal financial services. It's just sort of labeled as like, it's not really worth it. Crypto as money is really interesting because once you get to a situation, which is what we're building towards, where you can use a stable cryptocurrency for all those normal financial services, is just having an account and making transactions, being able to loan money back and forth, and so on and so forth. Once you can do all of that peer-to-peer, then there aren't these other entities involved in making a bunch of decisions and limiting what you can do. And so what that means is that if you can get the sort of software infrastructure to use cryptocurrencies, stable cryptocurrencies, in a way that's sort of as seamless as modern financial services, where it's equally convenient or even more convenient, then you really can give access to an enormous number of people who don't have at point in time, or at least much easier access than they currently have. So it's like, I think that kind of the naive, simplistic view of like what unbanked means is kind of like, oh, you live in a country that's so underdeveloped where there literally aren't bank branches. And so you don't have a bank account because you can't, drive to a bank or walk to a bank. That's not really the problem at this point in history. The problem, sort of that we see on the ground with, we don't even use the term unbanked anymore because it's kind of so quaint. It's really sort of, the system has kind of discriminated against you. from the outside, or your own country is stopping you from accessing the outside. And crypto as money done right can massively change that. And we already see that happening in the crypto industry. This is no longer just looking in the crystal ball and talking about the future. This is starting to happen pretty organically in Asia and in different parts of the crypto industry, but we think it can go so much further than it is right now. That's really that's the basic idea we have in mind as we're building.
Great. Yeah, that's an interesting viewpoint because everyone talks about the unbanked, but there's a huge variations of it, right? So I think there's a lot of people who just have different problems in different emergent areas. So yeah, I think something I really like to talk about with your project, because I researched it, is your investors. Can you tell me, like, how did you get like some of these huge investors, and what involvement do they have?
The process is pretty straightforward in terms of spending time networking and having conversations with one of our investors, Peter Thiel, who people like to talk about maybe the most. We happened to be connected prior to this because he funded a prior project that I co-founded, and so sort of ironically, that was one of the easier conversations to have. And then on the question of how involved are they? They were involved pretty significantly early on, and a bunch of their thinking shaped a bunch of the ways that we've set out to do what we're doing. Right now, day to day, we don't call on them very often because we're sort of much more operationally oriented. It's like, okay, we've decided all these things we need to do, and then we're just sort of working as hard as we can doing those things. But I think that the way startups often work is once you get a product that's really working and you're scaling it up as fast as you can, then you get to the point where like business development and partnerships and introductions start to be a lot more valuable. Like we noticed that we got tons of introductions from investors earlier on, and it's like, when the thing you're doing is still on paper and it's not in code and it's not real, then that's not really that relevant. So basically, I anticipate kind of the pendulum swinging back toward working and involving our investors a lot more in the coming year or so.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like, I do believe as the progress of the project gets better and better, they don't really need to be involved, but then the backing means a lot to people, right? Like people having that name, they know it's trustworthy. So that's amazing that you guys were able to do that. Speaking about you as a person, because like I think the team is really important within the project. Who is someone in crypto you haven't met but want to?
Okay, so it's a great question. It's a great question. This is maybe an unconventional answer. I want to meet the person in China who trades the largest volume of Tether OTC on a daily basis. And I might know who that person is, but I might be wrong. So I'm not even going to say a name. That's the person that I, at least off the top of my head, would really, really love to meet in person and spend a weekend together talking about the ins and outs of how they run their operation.
Interesting. Yeah, that's definitely an original answer for sure. Something that people don't know about you, like a special human trick that you like to share, like that's something fun about yourself.
A special human trick? DJing capability. I'm not really a DJ. I make sort of pre-made mixes, but they like some of them. That's something they already know about. I guess a sort of quirky trick that probably nobody in crypto knows about is when I was in high school, I got into a sport called footbag, commonly known as hacky sack. And so I can do some sort of pretty weird things, tossing a footbag up and moving my feet around it and then catching it again. Probably pretty rusty at this point, but that's maybe my one weird party trick.
In 5 years with RSR and RSV, what is one thing that your goal is to accomplish? What's your aim? Like, if you could just say it in like a couple of sentences, like someone comes up to you and says, hey, what's the point of all this? Like, what do you want to do in 5 years? What do you want the project to be?
Yeah, I mean, we want to make it so that anyone in the world can frictionlessly transact with anyone else, which you would think would be simple at this point, but it really isn't. And we think that can enable like tons of economic activity that's not happening right now. And then the way we think about it internally, we want to build an immune system for hyperinflation. What do I mean by that? So we want to get to the point where it's so easy to adopt crypto and use it as money in a totally functional way, like across an entire country or economy. If any country mismanages its currency and goes into a hyperinflation, prior to the point where everyone's savings is wiped out and the economy totally dies, everybody naturally sort of in a swarm without any sort of single decision maker switches over, and the economy just continues running. And so on a global scale, we think of that kind of like an immune system in the human body, because it's like there's this bad thing and then there's this system in place that sort of notices that and in a decentralized way, not just sort of, and stops the really bad event from happening. So, we're dealing primarily in Venezuela right now with the work that we're doing. And that's a situation where hyperinflation has already devastated the country, or it's part of the devastation of the country. We constantly just think like, man, if only we had been here, several years ago, this maybe could have been, massively useful. And so we think a lot about prevent those events in the future if we truly succeed. So 5 years from now, if we've massively succeeded, we will at least be well on the way to having that sort of immune system up and running.
Well, that about wraps it up. Thanks to our special honored guests from Reserve, Nevin Freeman. And thanks to our sponsors, CoinMarketCal. They cover all events to help traders make better choices and decisions. RSR is listed on Huobi, so take a look at it when you get a chance. Thanks, Huobi Nation, for staying tuned. See you next time. Bye-bye.